crypto soul. Welcome to the Eри카쇼. For those of you who are new to the show, the E리카쇼 welcomes builders who play a pivotal role in the blockchain space. 안녕하세요. crypto soul 에리카입니다. 에리카쇼는 블록체인 업계의 다양한 분들과 인터뷰를 하고 있는 콘텐츠입니다. 이번 게스트는 정석대로 가는 프로젝트로 유명한 블록스택의 대표님 Muneeb Ali님을 모셨습니다. So today's special guest is Muneeb, who's the co-founder of Blockstack. Welcome, Muneeb. It's been a while since you last met. How have you been?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's been a while. I was in Asia last year, and I was planning to come again this year, but then again, you know, the virus happened. But thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Of course, you were on top of my list, so I'm very happy to have you here. And, you know, there might be some viewers who are not familiar with who you are. And can you please introduce briefly about yourself and share with us what you're currently working on right
now? Absolutely. So I'm Muneeb, co-founder of Blockstack. My background is mostly in computer science. I did my PhD at Princeton University. Before kind of like getting into crypto, which I did in around 2013. In Bitcoin terms, like I think Bitcoin was less than $100, I think $90 or something at that point. So I've been in crypto for a while, but before crypto, I was mostly doing research work on internet protocols, data centers, cloud computing, that type of a background. And then started a company mostly for building secure internet infrastructure out of the Princeton Computer Science department. And then we discovered blockchains. And once we discovered blockchains, it was just a rabbit hole. We realized that blockchains are kind of like the best way to implement some of the stuff that we originally wanted to implement, like a next generation internet. And from there, you know, I'll share more details about our journey, but that's how it started.
Yeah, definitely. I was just going to ask right about the crypto rabbit hole, and your, you know, background is very extraordinary. You have a PhD, and like it must have been quite a jump from the academics to the blockchain, which is pretty crazy. Could you explain more about like how you joined the crypto space and what made you be inspired to join it, basically?
Yeah, I think basically what happened was that when I discovered the technology, right, like going through the Bitcoin network, and there were some early versions of other blockchains as well, right? This is actually pre-Ethereum. Ethereum didn't exist. And I was just like really fascinated by how many different areas, like for example, peer-to-peer networks, applied cryptography, distributed systems, and this is just like within computer science, but then there's game theory, there is the entire kind of like economic modeling of these new assets, and even like political science in the sense that, you know, there's decentralized governance and all of that. So it was just like a very intellectually rich kind of an environment. And it felt very raw and very early. I actually remember this feeling very, very clearly that whenever I was doing like research work in distributed systems, it would feel that someone invented things like 20 years ago, and we are just incrementally improving it. Whereas crypto felt like it's just pure greenfield. It felt like what the early internet would have felt to people in like early 90s or late 80s or something. And it was very clear that the kind of work we are doing here, it will like go down in history. Like I could tell even back then that some of the people around me, like there will be books written about this, and it ended up happening, right? Like they're already, the industry has grown so much, and it's just like fascinating.
Yeah, we're all part of the history. I hope so. And you know, you built Blockstack, and that was a huge, you know, news for everybody. What also made you the inspiration to build Blockstack, and how did you all begin the process?
Yes, so I think the key insight was that blockchains will get used for more than just monetary transactions, right? Like people will start doing, they will start building general purpose applications, meaning, you know, the next generation Facebook might actually get built on top of a blockchain. Yep. And we started looking into what does the infrastructure for that look like. Let me give a little bit more background. There are certain ways like our approach is very different from things that people have seen, like obviously Ethereum is a big example of smart contracts and these decentralized applications. And the core way that we differ are effectively two things. One is that from day one, and I think this is mostly because of my distributed systems background, we've been in the camp of you cannot scale things on like at the blockchain layer, right? Like we've been in the camp of like, you need to move most of the things off chain. And this is simply not possible to do everything on chain, right? So I think Ethereum has built a great community, and it's amazing the kind of experiments that they do over there. And from day one, and I still remain a critic of like the Ethereum 2 type technical approaches. They're still trying to build a very complex on-chain type of a system. Right. I remain a skeptic and a critic. I think that most things would actually move off-chain, like layer 2 type solutions. Storage would move off-chain. Most of these, and that's like one approach. So we're in that camp. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, we're actually in the camp that the hardest challenge here is which cryptocurrency would actually become like sovereign money, right? Like sovereign money is a very, very hard thing for some crypto asset to achieve. And we think that Bitcoin by far has the best chance of doing that, right? So Bitcoin might become this reserve cryptocurrency. Bitcoin tends to be very careful, very durable, very stable when it comes to introducing any changes to the core protocol. And we like that. We really like that. We're in that camp. And what we're doing is we're bringing smart contracts and apps to Bitcoin on top of Bitcoin, right? So the way the Stacks 2.0 blockchain works is, I think you can visualize that as almost like a kind of like a side chain, but it's not really a side chain. It's like a parallel connected system that benefits from the security of Bitcoin, but it adds all the missing features, like a full smart contract language, like the ability to build applications. Even our crypto asset Stacks, it has a very interesting relationship with Bitcoin because the mining is happening at the Bitcoin layer. So imagine that our consensus algorithm, it spans Bitcoin and the Stacks blockchain. It's the first consensus algorithm between two blockchains, right? So what we are saying is, just like in the early 90s, there were several different types of networks, but eventually everything collapsed onto TCP/IP and what we know as the internet today, right? So Bitcoin is that TCP/IP type layer that is becoming a standard and will become sovereign money. And we are kind of like building the other layers and protocols on top of it. And that's I think the main difference between us and Ethereum or some other approaches.
Yeah, I think a lot of followers really love the idea that you're building with Bitcoin, and like you're a huge follower of Bitcoin. I think that's the beauty of your project. And I love how you separate the camps, and you're in that camp. I just love that distinction. And I think the project is really well known for the step-by-step approach, like getting the right investments, getting the SEC approval and so forth. And a lot of people wonder like how it was like getting these investments from like amazing like institutions, people, Naval Ravikant, USV, DCG, like all these great, institutions. What was it like to go through that process? And what do you think was the captivating factor that attracted the VCs?
Yeah, I think in some ways we've been very, very fortunate that we were able to get the attention of all these people. I remember like back when we were starting off 2013, 2014 is when some of the early investors came in. We went through Y Combinator. Juan from Filecoin was actually in the same batch as me.
Oh, really?
At Y Combinator. So we are like friends from back
buddies.
Then. And interestingly, like, frankly, nobody understood what we were working on, right? Like it was super early. People did not understand what crypto assets are, what blockchains are, what kind of opportunities are here. But we were very fortunate to get the backing for, as you mentioned, people like Naval Ravikant or Union Square Ventures, not only because they're really good investors, they could be helpful, but I feel a really interesting fit there was that they understood how long-term of a commitment this is, right? So I remember Naval Ravikant basically he used his syndicate. AngelList has these syndicates. So Naval used his personal syndicate to invest in Blockstack as well. And to his syndicate investors, he basically said that this is like a research project, and it has a very high risk of failure, and it's on a very long time horizon. And he was like very upfront about it. So I think there was this, same with Union Square Ventures. Like Union Square Ventures, they realized this is a 10+ year journey. We're building open source software. It's not that, there's no traditional business model. And there's a stark difference between, people who really get it versus more traditional VCs who would be like, hey, so what's your business model? And like, well, the business model is to build the next generation internet, right? And so I think we've been very fortunate, and that turned out to be very helpful because you're right, that we have taken a very thoughtful approach in not just in the legal frameworks. I think we are more known for the legal frameworks just because it was a very public kind of like, first ever SEC qualified offering.
Yes.
But the things that I'm more proud of is the same kind of thoughtful approach being taken, let's say, on the design of our smart contract language. Like imagine that hundreds of millions of dollars are already kept on these smart contract languages, right? So it is actually a huge responsibility on the scientists that are kind of like designing these languages, that what are we doing to make sure that we are making it easier for developers to write safe contracts, or we are making it easy to do automated verifications, like even before running the code. So I'll highlight a key difference between Clarity language, which we are developing, and then Algorand also partnered with us, Silvio Micali from Algorand, and recently I think Arviv is doing very interesting things with Clarity as well. So Clarity itself is now becoming almost like a language that can potentially run on multiple blockchains. And the key difference of Clarity from Solidity that more people will be familiar with is that Clarity is heavily optimized for security, right? We think that the main thing the smart contract language needs to do is security, because people are keeping hundreds of millions of dollars on these smart contracts. So what happens is that in Clarity, a developer, first of all, knows, just like in Solidity, you have an estimate for a gas fee. And it's an estimate because no one really knows what exactly will happen when the contract executes, right? You can't predict what's going to happen. So that's why it's an estimate, and then when the contract actually executes, you know how much gas fee was consumed. Right. In Clarity, it's a precise gas fee because you know exactly what the contract is going to do, even without running it. So even before running the program, people can actually have mathematical proofs around what the contract can and cannot do, right? Which is almost like a superpower. Like imagine like instead of doing like manual audits of the code and you still don't know what the code is going to end up doing, you almost can do formal verification, and you can have much stronger guarantees around what the program can and cannot do, which is almost like night and day in terms of security properties. And we designed it that way for a reason, and it took like 2+ years of work, and Clarity is now going live on the Saks blockchain with the 2.0 release in December, and we're super excited about that.
Yeah, what a development. And I think a lot of people are excited about new language, and also like the security aspect, especially these days, right? It's becoming really, really important, and I think people feel the importance of it. So you're in the right timing right now. And you just mentioned about the SEC, the rigorous process of going through the approval, and it's been huge news because it's like the first one. And like, can you just briefly tell us how was it like to go through that? It's hundreds of pages of. You mentioned about it earlier, I remember. Yeah.
Let me give some background there, right? So I think this connects back to the feeling of just greenfield, like everything is new, everything is uncharted territory, and in some ways, like it's challenging, but it's also exciting, right? Like you're like, okay, let's figure this out. And interestingly, what was happening is this is around 2017, so we raised a Series A round of funding. The company did, and we were getting ready to begin development on our blockchain. We wanted to distribute the crypto asset, and we started looking into what kind of it just felt strange, like the kind of quote unquote ICOs that were happening, and people are just sending money to an address. I'm like, wait a minute, like, there are rules and regulations around protecting investors, and the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, is there for a reason. They regulate all these public markets where money from investors is coming in. So we started doing more research, and interestingly, I think at that time, I think now even the law firms are a little bit more sophisticated. But back in 2017, the law firms were like trying to just figure it out. Like they had no idea what crypto is. They were all sorts of like conflicting opinions. And the approach that I took was, instead of even going to law firms that had some exposure to crypto, I went to the law firm that basically I felt that had a really in-depth understanding of securities regulations. And they were generally more on the side of being very careful, right? So if it's a spectrum, so there are some lawyers who are basically like willing to take more risk, or some are in the middle, and someone is like, no, we have to be as careful as possible.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. And then I started learning more about securities regulations, and then I started educating lawyers on crypto networks. Like there's a model, like you can explain things in a certain way and credit goes to our law firm, Wilson Sonsini, and especially Rob Rosenblum, the lead lawyer there. They're amazing, and they quickly ramped up. They figured out what the key issues here are, and we actually took a very contrarian approach. We said that the SEC is likely to treat most of these things as securities in the US. So even though we think that this is just a utility, it's like Bitcoin, out of an abundance of caution, we will treat these assets as securities in the US. And then down the road, we start seeing enforcements on EOS, enforcements on Telegram, enforcements on Kick, and even the courts sided with the SEC. And in some ways, like we did all the prep work to figure out like what type of legal frameworks apply to doing an offering. That was part one of it. And now I think you'll see with our upcoming launch of Stacks 2.0, almost like the part two of the legal framework, where how can trading start for an asset in a more kind of like clearly compliant manner, and it'll be pretty interesting.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. And, you kind of rebranded to Stacks. And I was like, wow, it's such a great name. So it was a rebranding of Blockstack PBC. And there's like this new companies like Hero, which is like the building developer tools on top. And then there's Stacks, and then Freehold Daemon. Like there's so many things, new concepts that are happening here. So does Blockstack still use the name, or like how did you decide to rebrand the entire ecosystem?
Yeah, so I think let's go into a little bit of a background and context here. So our company kind of like raised capital and did a bunch of R&D work. We built a bunch of public infrastructure, the core protocols. And imagine that for the internet, that was actually done by independent research universities through like a DARPA grant, right? Like DARPA back in the day funded a bunch of universities, and that's how the core technology got built. In our case, like it was a single company that was doing this initial R&D and building the public infrastructure, and we don't want things to be that centralized or dependent on just our company, right? So we went through a explicit decentralization path where we helped start an independent nonprofit foundation. We actually have enabled research centers in some top universities. It's not fully announced yet, but stay tuned for more updates there. But the model really is that you need to decentralize the future development of the technology. Once the public infrastructure is built, like we are winding down that work with the launch of Stacks 2.0. And then also, I think there was some confusion between Blockstack PBC, the company, and Blockstack, the project. Right? Like sometimes people would call me the CEO of Blockstack, which is a little bit like, well, Blockstack is a decentralized network. It doesn't have a CEO, right? I run a company. So I think to fix some of that as well, and to basically mark this transition very explicitly, that the company that started the project now has almost like broken up into many different, not broken up, like there are now many independent entities now that have taken on the responsibility of some of that work on the community side, on Asia markets, and so on. And the original company rebranded to Hero, so I am the CEO of Hero, and that makes sense. It's a company that builds developer tools on top of the Stacks blockchain. And I think the new brand, and I just love the new brand. I think it makes things very clear and clean, and I think it was the right time to actually do it before the launch of Stacks 2.0.
Yeah, that's great. And okay, the CEO of Hero, I will apply this to my thumbnail image. Yeah, and this whole rebranding has been very, I think, new to the followers, and they were really curious about it. And the 2.0, Stacks 2.0 is coming. Can you tell us more about like what was the before and after, and what is there an after Stacks 2.0, or what's the roadmap basically that you're planning right now?
Yeah, so I feel like in some ways the name Stacks 2.0 actually doesn't do justice to 2.0 because 2.0 is actually the main thing that we've been working on, right? It's the master design. It's in some ways like if we would have not launched 1.0, 1.0 is a very limited blockchain. If we would have not launched 1.0, in some ways it might have been easier for people to understand like what we are doing, right? But because 1.0 is live and people use it and there are apps built on top, sometimes it becomes a little bit more confusing that, okay, what's the new feature and why you guys are so excited? So if you're new, I would say just focus on 2.0. It is by far the main thing that we've been working on for years and years. It is the first blockchain that actually has a consensus between two blockchains. Right, and not just any other blockchain, consensus with Bitcoin. And the consensus is called proof of transfer, POX, introduces a bunch of new things. I think people are familiar with proof of work, which is what Bitcoin uses, which is what Ethereum 1.0 uses, and then people are familiar with proof of stake, right? ETH 2.0 is supposed to use proof of stake. There are new networks like Algorand or Avalanche and Solana, they use proof of stake. And proof of transfer is something new. It actually has some really nice properties like proof of work, and it has some really nice properties like proof of stake. But it's in some ways the best of both worlds. The way it works is we reuse Bitcoin's hash power. So we depend on Bitcoin's hash power and rely on it for security, right? So in our consensus algorithm between two blockchains, if someone wants to attack the history of the blockchain, they actually have to go and attack Bitcoin. And good luck with that, right? It's by far the most secure blockchain out there. And then I think we have some interesting properties where holders of the Stacks cryptocurrency can also participate in consensus. They can lock up their asset to run nodes and have some, send some useful information to the network. But they earn Bitcoin from consensus, directly from the consensus protocol. So instead of earning more of the same asset, it's the first asset where if you lock up Stacks, you're earning Bitcoin on it. And I think that's a very interesting property because it establishes our connection to Bitcoin, where it's an asset. Imagine that Bitcoin wants to be the asset which is the measure of value for other assets, right? So Stacks price is actually natively determined by miners on chain. So the true kind of like exchange pair between Bitcoin and Stacks is determined through the consensus algorithm, because miners are bidding Bitcoin and they're bidding on the blocks, that what's the value of a block given the newly minted STX or the Clarity fees that are coming online. They determine the exchange rate, and then the trading that's happening on exchanges somehow is secondary. The real price is on chain.
Yeah, wow, what an attractive feature to get like rewards Bitcoin. Wow, that's amazing. So there's like the staking and validating rewards of the POX, and how do they compete with BTC lending across centralized and decentralized offerings? This is a question by the community, by the way, and they're really curious about this. Do you have an answer to that?
I think there are two things happening here. One is that there is a really big opportunity. Bitcoin is now, looking at the price today, something like $300 billion of passive capital. Some of it is moving into smart contracts through wrapped Bitcoin. It's like less than 1% of Bitcoin, right? And I think the bulk of Bitcoin still remains a passive capital. So what we're doing is with bringing smart contracts through this consensus algorithm to Bitcoin, our smart contracts have visibility into Bitcoin, meaning that if you send a normal Bitcoin transaction, let's say that we had a bet and, you know, I'm monitoring your address, that if you get $5 on that address, some logic will trigger. So you can actually start programming those things. You can have logic around directly Bitcoin, but then you can more easily move Bitcoin from the Bitcoin chain into the Stacks chain and start deploying it as active capital, right? So if you want to lend, borrow USD against your Bitcoin, you can do that through a native connection to Bitcoin, through a more secure programming language like Clarity. And sometimes, you know, there are these tribes as well, like Bitcoiners don't want to send their Bitcoin to Ethereum. Well, if you don't want to do that, you can do that natively around Bitcoin now. And the other aspect is the Stacks asset. So I think we will see some Bitcoin DeFi type products that people will program with Clarity contracts. We're already seeing these decentralized exchanges or other types of financial products that people try to write with Bitcoin on the Stacks chain. But on the other side, the Stacks asset itself could be modeled as almost like a product that gives you earnings in Bitcoin. And we recently released the economic model around this. So if, let's say, 50% of the liquid supply of Stacks is participating in consensus and some other default parameters, people can earn like 9 or 10% annual earning in Bitcoin by holding Stacks, right? So that's almost like a native product because you're earning that from the consensus algorithm itself instead of a smart contract.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, like, you recently had did you have a hackathon previously, or are you planning a hackathon? Because I think there's going to be a lot of people that wants to build on this because it's going to be pretty interesting after maybe 2.0 when it comes out, right?
Yeah. I think we already have hackathons because all these systems are live on our testnet. Yeah. So people can deploy contracts on testnet, and we're seeing a lot of interest there. I think something like 120 smart contracts got built recently. On the testnet. People, this is super exciting because think of it this way. I think most of the developers, like 99% of the developers are still outside of crypto. They're going to learn about what is crypto mostly through Bitcoin first.
Yep.
And right now what happens is that because Bitcoin is not programmable, they end up discovering other systems like Ethereum and they try to program there. But once Bitcoin is programmable and Clarity language kind of like works, I think there's a huge opportunity to grab the attention of all those developers, explain to them why Clarity is secure, why do you want a secure programming language versus something like JavaScript, and how do you turn, you know, the $300 billion worth of passive Bitcoin capital directly into active capital and deploy it. I think that's where the big opportunity is, and that's clearly the camp that we are in, right? Like we have the boundaries have been marked. Like we are in the Bitcoin camp. We think that this is where the world is heading. And interestingly, like you don't have to be fully in one camp, right? Like especially you could hedge this. You could, like, you know, there's some probability that ETH2 would end up, you know, taking over, or Bitcoin plus Stacks would end up taking over, or some new protocol. There's some amazing new teams as well, right? But as far as like we're concerned, I think our confidence level is very high that it's going to be Bitcoin.
Definitely. And you recently published an article on Cointelegraph, and you said that DeFi would be a lot more sustainable had there been involvement of BTC in DeFi products. That's what you said. And can you elaborate a little bit more on that thought? And can you just tell us a little bit what you view on the current DeFi market?
Yeah, so I think to understand this, we need to understand this different, almost like cultures in Bitcoin and Ethereum, right? Bitcoin tends to be, you know, more careful around design, more careful around, hey, they don't want to lose their Bitcoin. If they want to introduce any changes, they tend to be like more conservative, more careful there. Whereas Ethereum is more experimental, right? Like there are things like, hey, I was testing in production and did something, right? Like testing in production is like, you know, I'd be personally scared of it. Doesn't mean that the other approach doesn't have its advantages, right? It has advantages like they can move fast, they attract a certain type of community where people celebrate failure, and, you know, you should just like go out and build and support each other. I think it's great to have all these different cultures there. Right now, most of the DeFi-like products are coming out of the Ethereum community, and they tend to have a certain type of like, you know, these food coins that came online and all of the craziness that was happening there. Yep. I think if financial products are being built by the other culture that tends to be more careful and more serious about security and all those things, I think you'll start seeing slightly different type of financial products, right? So that's kind of like what I meant. Mm-hmm. That and once again, like it does not need to be a zero-sum game, right? It doesn't need to be either or. I think both of them can exist. Mm-hmm. And we should celebrate these almost like cultural differences and how these parallel tracks could be explored. But I do think that the track with Bitcoin is underexplored right now. There mm-hmm. aren't a lot of smart contract products around Bitcoin. There aren't a lot of kind of like approaches that are being experimented with, and I think that's what we are trying to change. We are trying to bring more innovation to Bitcoin. We're trying to bring more experimentation over there, but then we're trying to do it in a way that is more compatible with the culture of Bitcoin, mm-hmm. that where people can get these formal proofs, where people can have kind of like, you know, even our SEC offerings. Like imagine like large institutions who are now getting ready to purchase Bitcoin or take positions in Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. If they want to purchase some other asset, our SEC legal framework actually helps them versus some of the thinking in the Ethereum framework where they would, without looking that much into the legal frameworks, they would just go out and distribute an asset, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a different type of a risk tolerance, which I think when it comes to institutional capital, when it comes to Wall Street, they're more likely to hold Bitcoin. They're more likely to hold an asset that has a clear legal framework behind it. And I think that's the area that we are exploring more.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, even in Korea and an Asian community, who really believe in Bitcoin, but are a little frustrated, like it's a little stagnant in the ecosystem, and like they want more innovations and built on Bitcoin. And I think that's why your product is so welcomed. And you've been tackling the Asian market pretty aggressively. I mean, I know that you have a team dedicated to helping you in the Korean community front, but how are you like planning to target the Asian community more, and what can we expect from the upcoming year?
Yeah, so I think I do think that this year was a little bit of a setback in terms of like physical presence. We couldn't travel. I had a bunch of travel personally planned, and we couldn't do it. But you know, it is what it is. But in general, we actually have two independent entities. One is called New Internet Labs, Larry, and then we have Damon Technologies, Zan. Damon is focused more on mining. Larry is focused more on apps and clients in the ecosystem. And I think they're both based out of Hong Kong, but they generally try to cater to the Asian market. We also have a bunch of partners in place, and in general, we're trying to move to this model of trying to identify some key regions around the world where, you know, potentially Stacks chapters could be established first, and basically giving the local community a place to coordinate and self-organize and have some sort of grants from the Stacks Foundation and so on. And it will be very interesting to know that Korea is actually one of the top 5 places on the list right now for the initial chapters. It's not fully announced, but maybe your followers can get a preview of it.
Yay.
That Korea is definitely in that list. Interestingly, like Turkey is up there. For some reason, we have really enthusiastic people in Turkey for the project, and then some areas like Middle East and so on.
Awesome! Wow. Yeah, I can hear the siren. Like it's a New York, so I miss New York so much. I miss the sirens too. Yeah, that's totally amazing. I think a Korean community would love to hear about this, and would to love you in Korea at some point next year or after that. But yeah, and last but not least, like, do you have any message that you want to send out to the Asian community or to the community in general? Like, who wants to know more about Blockstack? Oh, Stack, sorry, and Hero and the ecosystem and so forth?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that nobody really knows about these crypto markets, but it looks like we are, it's like they're cyclic, and we go through like years of building, and then a bull market comes, and then these things happen, and more people kind of like get introduced to crypto. So if you're getting introduced to crypto, like it looks like we're entering a bull market. You never know, but it looks likely that we're entering the next bull market. If you're getting introduced to crypto, it's likely that Bitcoin is the first asset through which you're getting introduced. And I think when you think about stacks, the idea there is that we are effectively bringing smart contracts to Bitcoin. We are in some ways making Bitcoin more valuable, because now you can deploy Bitcoin in smart contracts in a very responsible, secure way. And we are effectively building the foundations of a future internet on top of Bitcoin. And I think that's the biggest differentiator between stacks and other systems. And we started our kind of like work in Asia last year. And as I mentioned, with these chapters in Korea and so on, we would be continuing that. So we are really looking forward to expanding our community. We'll be producing more local content, and we are, give us feedback, and especially for the mainnet launch, right? The mainnet launch, we've been working for 6-7 years, and imagine that the Stack 2.0 mainnet launch is by far the biggest event in the history of the product, right? Like it's taken years and years of work of designing new programming languages, designing new consensus algorithms, building out the public infrastructure, all the legal frameworks around this to finally reach that point. And I think I would encourage you to learn more about it and how this can be good for Bitcoin, good for the crypto industry. And thanks so much for listening.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I mean, your enthusiasm excites me, and like I have high hopes for the project, and I hope to see you more in Asia next year, hopefully. And good luck on your journey forward. And thank you so much for taking your busy time to talk with me. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for hosting me.
Yeah.